On the coldest night the valley had seen in decades, when the wind screamed like a wounded animal and the snow fell so thick it erased the world one breath at a time, Ethan Cole noticed something terribly wrong next door, something that would change his life forever. Ethan had lived alone for years on his small, weather-beaten farm at the edge of town, a quiet man hardened by loss and long winters, the kind of man who fixed his own fences, spoke little and noticed details others ignored. That night, as he carried firewood inside, he saw that his neighbor, Harold Whitman's house, usually, glowing with a weak, yellow porch light even on the darkest evenings, was completely dark. No smoke curled from the chimney. No footprints marked the fresh snow. Harold was old, sick, and dying of lung disease, and Ethan had checked on him every few days despite their distant relationship. A chill deeper than the winter cold settled in Ethan's chest as he remembered Harold mentioning just weeks earlier, in a shame-filled whisper, that he had sent away for a mail-order bride from Eastern Europe, a young woman who was supposed to arrive before Christmas, someone to care for him in his final days. Ethan had thought it was foolish, maybe even cruel, but Harold had looked desperate, terrified of dying alone. Now the house sat like a grave. Acting on instinct, Ethan pulled on his coat, grabbed a flashlight, and trudged through the knee-deep snow toward Harold's place, each step crunching like a warning. He knocked once, twice, harder the third time, but no answer came. The door was unlocked. Inside, the house smelled of medicine, dust, and something else. Finality. He found Harold in the bedroom, already gone, his body cold, his eyes half open as if surprised death had come so quietly. Ethan stood there for a long moment, hat in hand, whispering a rough apology he wasn't sure was meant for Harold or himself. Then he noticed the suitcase near the door, small, cheap, new. His heart dropped. The bride had come. But where was she? Panic replaced grief as Ethan stepped back outside, sweeping his flashlight across the white emptiness. At first there was nothing, just wind and snow and darkness. Then he saw it, a shape near the fence line, barely visible beneath drifting snow. He ran. What he found there haunted him forever. A young woman lay crumpled against the fence, her thin coat soaked through, her lips blue, her body trembling violently as if fighting to stay in this world. Her eyes fluttered open as he knelt beside her, filled with terror, confusion, and fading hope. She tried to speak, but only a broken sound escaped. Ethan didn't hesitate. He lifted her, light as a child, freezing to the bone, and carried her back to his house through the storm. Every step, a battle against the wind, and the terrible thought that he might already be too late. Inside, he stripped off her frozen clothes, wrapped her in blankets, and sat beside the fire, rubbing life back into her hands, speaking softly, even though he didn't know if she understood English. Hours passed. Slowly, painfully, warmth returned to her skin. Her breathing steadied. When she finally opened her eyes fully, she stared at Ethan as if he were unreal. A ghost pulled from the snow. Tears streamed down her face without sound. She whispered one word, the only English she seemed to know. "Why?" Ethan had no answer. Over the next days, he learned her name was Anya. She had arrived by bus in a strange country, clutching a piece of paper with Harold's address and a promise of safety. When she reached the house, she found him dead, terrified, unable to understand the situation, afraid of police, afraid of strangers. She had wandered outside in shock, collapsing as the storm swallowed her. If Ethan had not noticed the dark house that night, she would have died there, nameless and forgotten, frozen beside a man she had never even met alive. As the reality sank in, the town reacted with suspicion and cruelty. Whispers spread fast. Who was the foreign girl living with Ethan now? Why was she there? Some claimed she was after money. Others hinted at darker things. Authorities questioned Ethan harshly, eyeing Anya like a problem to be solved rather than a human being. Ethan stood firm, something inside him changing, hardening into resolve. He gave Anya his spare room, cooked her meals, helped her learn English, and watched as she slowly came back to life. Her laughter shy at first, her eyes always searching for reassurance. What began as an act of necessity became something deeper, something neither of them expected. Ethan found himself protecting her not just from the cold, but from judgment, loneliness, and a world that had already tried to discard her once. And as the town pushed harder, as secrets about Harold's past surfaced and questions arose about Anya's future, Ethan realized saving her from the snow had only been the beginning. What happened next would shock everyone who thought they knew the truth and test how far one man would go to stand for kindness when the world chose cruelty instead. The storm that had nearly taken Anya's life passed, but the real storm arrived quietly in the days that followed, carried not by wind and snow, but by suspicion, paperwork, and the sharp eyes of a town that did not like mysteries it couldn't control. Ethan felt it the morning the sheriff's truck crunched up his driveway, tires grinding into the ice as if announcing judgment. Sheriff Miller was polite but firm, asking questions that circled the same point again and again. Why was Anya here? What did Harold Whitman intend? And what exactly had Ethan done after finding her? Ethan answered calmly, truthfully, his voice steady, even as his chest burned with anger at the implication beneath every word. Anya sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea, eyes darting between the men, understanding just enough English to know she was being discussed like a problem rather than a person. When the sheriff finally left, he warned them both that immigration would be involved, that things could get complicated. Complicated was an understatement. The letter came 3 days later. Anya's visa was tied to Harold. Harold was dead. Without a legal sponsor, she would be detained and deported within weeks. The paper shook in Ethan's hands as he read it aloud, and Anya's face drained of color when she understood. She had fled poverty, debt, and a family that had sold her hope in exchange for survival. Believing marriage, even to a dying stranger, was her one chance at safety. Now that chance was slipping away again. That night, she cried quietly in her room, trying to be silent, but Ethan heard every broken breath through the thin walls. Something in him snapped, not in anger, but in clarity. He had lived his life avoiding attachments, telling himself solitude was safer, easier, but safety had never saved anyone. The next morning, he drove Anya to town and sat with her in a lawyer's cramped office, listening as options were laid out in cold legal language. Asylum would be difficult, sponsorship unlikely, time short. Then the lawyer paused, glancing between them. There was one path, he said carefully. Marriage. The word landed between them like a live wire. Ethan felt his ears burn. Anya stared at the floor, shame and fear battling behind her eyes. The lawyer was quick to add conditions. Warnings, scrutiny. This would not be simple, and it would be examined harshly. But it was legal, and it could work. Outside, the air was brittle with cold. Ethan didn't speak until they reached the truck. He told Anya she didn't owe him anything, that he would help her leave if she wanted, that she should never feel trapped again. She surprised him by placing her hand over his, her fingers still scarred from cold and hardship, her voice quiet but firm. She said she trusted him, not because he was perfect, but because he had not turned away when the world had. They married at the courthouse 2 weeks later with no guests. No celebration, just a judge who barely looked up and a clerk who stamped. Papers with practiced indifference. The town erupted anyway. Whispers turned into accusations. Some called Ethan a fool. Others called him worse. An anonymous note was left on his porch one night, warning him to send her back where she came from. He burned it in the stove and said nothing. What shocked everyone was what followed. Anya flourished. She learned English with fierce determination, took a job at the local bakery, and treated every customer with a warmth that disarmed even the most suspicious faces. She volunteered at the church kitchen, sang softly while she worked, and remembered names, birthdays, small kindnesses. Slowly, people noticed. The foreign girl was no longer a rumor. She was a presence. When a blizzard trapped a family on the edge of town, Anya organized food deliveries. When the school fundraiser fell short, she baked through the night. Ethan watched from a distance, amazed at how light returned to his own home simply because she existed in it. Their marriage began as paperwork, but life has a way of turning necessity into truth. Nights talking by the fire grew longer. Laughter came easier. Pain was shared. Love arrived quietly, without announcement, settling into place like something that had been waiting all along. The investigation dragged on for months. Officials interviewed neighbors, combed through Harold's finances, searched for fraud. What they found shocked everyone, not about Ethan or Anya, but about Harold. He had been scammed by the agency, drained of money, misled about care, and abandoned in the end. Anya was not a predator. She was another victim. When the report became public, shame swept through the town. Apologies came awkwardly. Some never came at all. But the truth stood firm. Anya's residency was approved. The case closed. The whispers faded. On the anniversary of the storm, Ethan and Anya stood by the fence where she had nearly died, snow falling gently now, peaceful instead of cruel. She placed a flower there for Harold, not out of obligation but forgiveness. Ethan realized then that what had shocked the world was not a marriage or a legal loophole, but the power of choosing compassion when fear would have been easier. One man noticed a dark house. One woman survived the cold. And together they proved that kindness, when acted upon, can rewrite fate itself. If this story touched your heart, if you believe that humanity still matters in a world that often forgets, subscribe to the channel now. More powerful stories of hope, courage, and unexpected love are coming, and you won't want to miss them.